Thanks so much, Maddie. Welcome, everyone. Super excited for our program today. First, I'm going to introduce myself. For those who don't know me, hi, I'm Warner Moore. I'll be continuing to facilitate our TechLife Live program about leadership, career, and community. Just a quick bit about myself. I'm an entrepreneur with a tech and cybersecurity background. I founded a tech and cybersecurity strategy firm, GammaForce. Outside of climbing mountains for fun and leaping off them, I spend time with my family and also have a nonprofit hat through Tech Community Coalition, partnering with organizations such as TechLife Columbus, bringing community events to you, as well as supporting and facilitating the 60 plus active user groups we have here in the Columbus community. Super proud of the TechLife Live program. It's going to, well, shoot, it's crazy to think it's been 3 months. Just a few things as far as the program today, like Maureen encouraged before, please do have your video on. It's a casual group, come as you are, so don't worry about that. Throughout the program, we'll have opportunities to participate. So know that if we have a part of Maureen's prepared presentation where we're asking for feedback, we welcome you to have your video on and speak up. Or if you're not comfortable with that, contributing in the chat is welcome as well. We will likely have an opportunity for a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to share those live throughout the program if it's not a part where it's an interactive part of the program. Today, we are going to end on time, so expect the program to formally end at 6 p.m., but know that we'll be hanging out, at least I will, for about half an hour afterwards. So feel free to hang out and we'll just have some social time following. Take a break from the pandemic. Super pleased to present the final scheduled TechLife Live program on the subject of leadership, career, and community. Our capstone today is on the subject of executive leadership. Our first session introduced the concept of transitioning from peer to manager. Our second session was about evolving as a leader, growing outside of your organization, community leadership. And like mentioned today, our capstone today is executive leadership. I'm exceptionally pleased to have someone of Maureen Metcalf's caliber to be joining us today to facilitate us through that session. Maureen is the founder and CEO of the Innovative Leadership Institute. She has over 30 years of experience coaching executive leaders, CEOs, CIOs, many influential people across organizations who we know and love. She likes to help senior executive leaders up their strategy game and transform their organizations. Today, we're going to be exploring the concept of innovative leadership mindset. So please, Maureen, take us through.
Thank you so much, Warner. So what I didn't know about you is you and I share a common interest in mountain climbing. So before we start, what is your favorite or least favorite, but most aggressive climb?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, in my case, it's ski with some mountaineering. So I like backcountry skiing. And this past season, I was fortunate to be able to adventure around the Wasatch. That's a range near Salt Lake City in Utah. Mm-hmm. And probably the highlight of that trip, outside of some time I spent in Rocky Mountain National Park as well, was maybe Cardiff's Peak, right next to Mount Superior, mm-hmm. which is one of the 50 greatest ski descents.
Fabulous. And my skiing ability does not match yours by any stretch, but I can walk. So climbing, non-technical climbing was Kilimanjaro. So we're going to get into leadership. And something that's interesting to me is those places where we push our every fiber of our being to our limits. Really, for me, has helped build my confidence that I could go further, not faster, but further than I ever thought I could. And how do I reach inner resources? And also, how do I reach out to others who help me? Because much of what I've done has been a group activity, not solo, with the company and with books and everything else. So let's jump in. If you did not get the link, there are two possible links here. One is Assess Coach, Innovative Leadership Institute. That takes you to a brief assessment on these 7 mindsets of leaders. The bit.ly link gets you, if you go through that one, also gets you follow-up emails, 1 per competency. So if you go to the Innovative Leadership one, just the Assess Coach, you don't get any follow-ups except your report. And I know a lot of people don't want stuff. What you can count on about me is I don't sell it, and I don't have the energy to track people down, so I'm not going to. But you will get the pre-programmed information. So just jumping in, there are a couple intro slides, and all of us know that we're navigating disruption. So that is without dispute. The reason I put the picture of Einstein here is if I had to pick a favorite person, living or dead, it's probably Einstein. And it is because that he was the consummate scientist. And in my view, leaders need to, as we talk about innovating how we lead, we need to be leading differently. And part of that means moving out of, graduating from. Me as the leader who has a level of expertise in the subject matter, toward me as the leader who is no longer the primary expert, especially because our world is so complicated and complex. So now, rather than having answers, I need to know how to pull people together, create a hypothesis, pilot a solution. And chances are I've got 10 pilots going on at a time. And part of what I'm trying to do is understand how they overlap with each other, and then learn, continue to evolve. So good scientists don't, quote, get it right. They do good experiments and they learn. So moving out of the mindset of I'm supposed to know, and I'm not supposed to make mistakes, and I'm supposed to wait and plan and have a really good plan that we don't deviate from, that's not real anymore. And yet many of our leaders and many of us have that expectation of ourselves. So one more slide, and that's this whole VUCA idea: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And the word here that I really want to focus on is complexity, and the idea that in environments that are complex, there is often not a right or wrong answer. So back to the mind of the scientist, we through our activities help solutions emerge. It's not like we're uncovering them and through our expertise we find them. They actually don't exist, and we're creating them. And often we are both changing ourselves and the organization concurrently, because I have to be different to help unearth the solution and implement it in myself before we implement it in the organization. So this idea is really that we as leaders co-emerge and co-create solutions that solve our problems. So Warner, you've been through all of this innovative leadership stuff. How has it played out in your world?
It's interesting to reflect on. I'd say that, growing up in startups, volatility and uncertainty is just built in. Learning how to navigate situations like that is required. It's interesting to think of it in abstract. Perhaps there are others in the audience who have thoughts on this subject.
We know some of you and you have a point of view.
Well, I'll go. This is Kate, because I'm in organizational change management, as some of you know. And when you're in OCM, you really have to become comfortable with ambiguity and disruption, or you just won't be in OCM for long. And what I find often is when I start on a project, the disruption has already been a factor in the culture. And so I think that it's really, I was going to say insightful, Maureen, but I think it's just a natural that leadership mindsets should embrace this kind of thing because, as you said, especially think about the last 18 months, or how long has it been since we've been in this pandemic? It feels like 18 months. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of disruption, and we just have to learn to not necessarily overcome it, but face it and manage through it and in the midst of it.
Thank you, Kate. I think that's a brilliant observation that I hear people talk about going back to normal. And my sense is, again, this idea of complexity, we're co-creating what our future looks like. But for many people, it will not look like a return to, even if they go back to offices, and some people, if they were in manufacturing, they stayed on the manufacturing line. So some people didn't experience dramatic change in their personal situation, but for leaders, most folks did. Many of them were working remotely, some or all of the time, many of them having some or all of their teams scattered about. In technology, you couldn't escape it. So for those of us leading, for me, it's not just the external changes, but we talk about mindsets and the question of who do I want to be in this emerging context. So as we return from who am I and how do I want to behave during COVID, people were and are struggling with a range of things that leaders didn't really consider within their scope. It was, mental health people, and you send your kids to school and now they're at home. So we didn't have to deal with how do parents navigate one or more children in the house without daycare, having a range of issues. Often people's homes weren't constructed to have two adults working from home and kids running around. So we didn't have the sense of professionalism that was the norm before. So I think a lot of what we're facing is, some of it's structural, but some of it is who do I need to be as a human being as we're navigating these changes. And I think a lot of us have found we need to be more empathetic. We need to be more compassionate. We need to be more open. But I'm curious, what are you seeing that has changed in how you show up, not just the wardrobe and the setting, but how are you different now than you were 18 months ago or 16 months ago as humans in the workplace?
Well, Maureen, maybe I'll chime in a little here.
Thank you.
And in the previous life, I've spent in places where I would have a large physical interaction, where I have an office that I would go to, and I'd have employees that I could see and interact with in a physical sense. Even though I had virtual and remote employees that report to me, that I would find ways to keep engaged. Human nature tended to lean towards those who are closest to you. What I've noticed in transitioning, not only due to COVID, which a lot of us have, but I also transitioned to a startup myself that is a complete virtual startup. So in other words, all of our employees are scattered across the multiple countries and in different cities and states. And we're going to remain this way. So one of the things that I've been really focusing on is how to develop kind of a virtual engaged culture. And this mindset from the ground up, being designed to be virtual, has put things in perspective for me. I mean, the concept of a water cooler conversation doesn't and will never exist anymore. So how do I create such a moment of propinquity that will allow that free flow and exchange of ideas and connection and engagement with a company? And that's something that I've been experimenting with. And I think companies are also starting to dabble into this thought, because companies like Facebook wanting to or being bold and saying up to 50% of their workforce down in the future being remote. If companies head that direction, they can't ignore this aspect. And it is very refreshing to kind of build it from the ground up.
Thank you, Andy. I absolutely agree. And I'd love to hear you continue to jump in that while a lot of people are saying being remote isn't the same as in person, which it's not, I think we will learn to interact remotely and find benefit in things that we couldn't do in person. And so it will continue to be different, but I don't know that it will be less effective, just rather different.
Maureen, I'd like to also weigh in on this, because I agree with Andy that the sense of inclusion is much different when we're all virtual. I have worked in many jobs, I'm sure a lot of you have, where you're on a conference call, there might be 3 or 4 people virtual dialing in, the majority of people are in the room, or maybe it's the other way, but there's always a meeting after the meeting. You hang up and the people that are still in the room end up talking, and sometimes some really good conversation comes from that, and the people who were remote kind of missed out on that. So they missed out on the exposure and the visibility and the insights that came from the meeting after the meeting. And because I'm on a pretty large technology project right now in the organizational change management space, guiding people through change, I thought going virtual was disastrous because of the water cooler conversations Andy just talked about, the drive-bys. I mean, we were all in an open plan room, and you could get up and walk 4 feet to somebody, sit down and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or I have an issue with this. And so I was quite honestly a little terrified. But of course, we've found ways to work around that. And we have found ways to use technology to be able to replace those water cooler conversations. And very often I'll ping somebody and say, hey, I just need a couple of quick minutes because I just had this great idea and I want to talk to you about it. And it still happens. It just looks different. And if here's the real thing that I think, if we're able to figure out how to do hypercare in a virtual environment where you used to be able to raise your hand or put a flag on your PC and have somebody come over and talk to you, if we can successfully do hypercare in a virtual environment, then I think we can do anything. And so far we have been able to do that. So just to echo with what Andy was saying, I personally was terrified about having workshops and trainings and hypercare virtually. But you do what you need to do. And it goes back to that VUCA. Everything that if leaders can embrace that ambiguity and the volatility and complexity, especially in a technology project, then there's nothing we can't do.
Thank you for saying that. And that experimentation that you talked about, there may not have been a best practice when we started, but through experimentation, we get there and we create things that didn't exist. And I really do think they will be as good, but to your point, different. And there are some benefits we haven't talked about, like you can now have geographically dispersed teams. So for people who were limited because a spouse can't relocate, or family constraints, or taking care of aging parents, all those things that people are limited by, we are now able as companies to attract the best people, not the best people in our community, but the best people across the globe, really, which can address all kinds of social issues for communities that are struggling, and lots of other, and family cohesion and things like that. I think we now have some opportunities to solve some bigger social problems. So let's jump into real quickly. So there are 7 of these. We're not going to go into excruciating detail. We talk about mindsets versus behaviors. And what's really important for me to emphasize here is this isn't a checklist. It really is about these competencies being how I see the world versus was I humble enough in a meeting? So as we go through, we'll give some examples of the 7 that really good leaders are able to say, in one situation, I'm charismatic, in another situation, I'm quiet. And both are effective depending on who I am. And it's that I have the mindset of the leader that allows me to know which behaviors are most effective in any given setting. Does that resonate with folks? The difference between a mindset of something like humility versus the checklist of humility means the idea of leaders eat last. That may or may not make sense given your environment. But the mindset of servant leadership should guide how we treat our people.
I think that resonates with me, Maureen, in the sense of, well, there's so many management and leadership and business books that are just about tactics, right? And
yeah,
I've known many folks, and I've likely been guilty of it myself, where maybe there's a tactic that resonates. I don't have a good example off of the top of my head, but using it in every situation might not produce a good outcome. Whereas having a behavior or a mindset or empathizing with the circumstance and the person and the objectives is very different, where that tactic may help or it may not. Being quiet and listening and understanding, or externalizing and presenting and sharing a vision or a concept.
And my sense is, Warner, you're brilliant at knowing you've worked across a range of startups. Your behavior is likely different in different organizations, and it's different in a startup than it is in a nonprofit, than it is in a community setting.
It's interesting. I've been called corporate before in startup settings, and in enterprise settings, I know that I've been taken as the opposite of that. I've learned how to navigate different cultures pretty well. The average meeting in a startup, I might not show up in a suit. Can usually get away with the sport coat.
Yeah, and in other settings, you probably wouldn't go in anything other than a t-shirt.
You know, that's probably why I'll sometimes be called corporate still. I just don't like to wear t-shirts, and that's more me than anything else. Maybe at the gym.
You and I are the same in that, but I also recognize that how I look is interpreted by the viewer, and they attach meaning to whatever that is. And not always the meaning I wanted. So we're going to go through the 7 and just very quickly. So the first and most understandable, I think, for most people is good thinker. So 360-degree thinker. COVID gives us a brilliant opportunity to think about this. And I use Dr. Fauci as an example. And I realize if we pick any living person, somebody can see that as a political statement or a negative. In no way am I trying to make a political statement. He's just somebody we all see on the news. And I think is less politically charged than lots of people. So we've got COVID. We've got the questions of masks and vaccines and how do we keep safe. We need leaders to be able to look not just at our own organizations or our own functional department, but across our enterprise, across our industry, across our geography, and now across the world. And I think a lot of us are doing things that are impacting folks in other geographies and other continents. And we never imagined that would be true a couple of years ago. So I'm curious in chat, is there anyone who, or in chat or vocal, because we're such a brilliantly sized group to actually have conversations. What do you do to build your systems thinking, 360-degree thinking capacity?
Maureen, I had to do this one time when I was thrown into my first CEO job, and I think you understand that. The challenge for me was there were so many things going on and so many different people that wanted things from me that I had to sit down and think about, well, who are all of my constituents, right? Who all am I working for? And then I took each group, there were 5 of them, and I took each group and I said, well, if I'm them, what do I want out of me, right? Or out of our organization. And so I got pretty general but specific, right, in terms of what are we doing for each one of these groups, and then making sure that whenever we had major decisions to make, that we went through the 5 groups and made sure that, you know, we were doing the best we could for all groups, right? Because not every group always benefited.
Thank you. I think that's a really good example, especially as you're balancing. Folks often advocate for what's best for them. And as the leader, you're balancing what is best for the enterprise to meet its mission.
Right.
And that's often quite the balancing act. And so coming back to the mindset versus the tactic or checklist, the idea that I consistently look across the enterprise and in some cases, and Mike, I know you did this as well, looked at the industry and the different geographies, different continents on which you were working, and balanced decisions about where you did manufacturing and what got outsourced and insourced. And those things are in flux, especially now as we're able to travel to some countries and not get products from different countries, and those things, the conversations get more complex.
No, they definitely do. You're right. You're right. But just keeping that. So first of all, and we talk about this in IT leaders, Andy will know that too, and Warner already knows this, but sort of really thinking through your vision, your mission, and your values, and really aligning yourself with those and aligning what the company does and how it does business, really makes a lot of this just a little bit easier, right? Because if you have that servant mindset and you have, you know where you're headed, and you know how you want to work to get there and how you want to work together with all of your constituents, it becomes easier because you don't have to think about it every time something comes up. And that's one of the things that really helps you with the speed, right? Because things are changing so quickly. You have to be able to change quickly, but you're doing it within a framework that covers a lot of ground. And it just, it just makes that a lot easier.
Thank you. The other thing I would say on the mindset on the 360-degree thinker, often people, and it's a tendency of how our brains operate, try to simplify and come up with simple solutions for simple problems. Yet when we're dealing with very complex problems, there are some organizational cultures that really resist looking at things through the lens of high complexity. And I'm not saying complexify things that are simple, but I'm saying when we're dealing with things that are complex, we should acknowledge and try to think through problems with the level of complexity required by the situation. The next is intellectually versatile. And this is for people who talk about things like the growth mindset. This is, I am committed to my own personal growth, the growth of others, and the acknowledgement that, again, in navigating complexity, I have to know, while I may still need to be a subject matter expert in a specific area, I also have to be informed about a broad range of topics. And again, this is more than we ever had in our past life. And so does anyone want to comment on how they're dealing with, how do you stay smart about the range of things that you didn't need to deal with before because somebody else took care of them? Warner, I know you read a lot. What do you do? And I respect very greatly that the depth with which you explore topics you care about. What do you do to stay informed and balance that with having a life outside of reading?
I think it's kind of a personal thing. I don't believe in learning styles. That's not a scientific thing. It's a commonly held misconception. All people can learn always, just some people prefer different ways. So the ways I prefer are reading. I don't like videos because, or frankly, even podcasts, because they're time bound. I can read quickly. So I like reading a lot, but I think really it comes down to prioritizing my time around what I consider higher value activities. I'd much rather be here with you creating something than I would be consuming something passive. And I take that universally. Often surrounding myself with people who are versed on topics and take similar philosophies. So I'd say really focusing first on creation and learning over passively consuming. And as far as just raw learning, I like to read a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, and you are a person that I look to for your expertise because you invest in it. Does anyone else want to share anything? Mike Sayer, I know you're right now in a certification program. You finished another one recently, so that's another option for.
You know, I'm pretty curious. So when I see topics and things that are going on, like all the violence, Black Lives Matter, those sort of things, I start with reading and try to get, you know, some level of knowledge, and then I'll start attending things that I'm not very comfortable, settings I'm not very comfortable in that have to do with those, so that I can learn more. And so, you know, sometimes I'm pretty quiet because I'm trying to learn, right? And then I'll engage more as I get more comfortable with that. So reading, going to events like these for me is really good. Certifications, I studied, for the last 4 years, I've studied a lot of Black history in this country. And after going through that, I decided I need a framework to take all that and put it together. So I took the D&I course from Cornell University. And so that helped me sort of bring it all together. And so that's how that's sort of my process, right?
Thank you. Unwavering commitment to right action. So this one is interesting to me. One, the question of how do we define right? And Mike talked about vision and values, and this idea that what's right for me is different potentially than right for others. So this is where I'll use Dr. Fauci. And there's the balance between, I am pushing toward a mission. So pushing toward preventing death in Fauci's case. And yet, so unwavering commitment in that, and yet pivoting on tactics when the science indicated a change in direction. And so, again, not a political statement, but watching Dr. Fauci differ in point of view with a sitting president when the president ran the organizations that he was employed by. And rarely, well, depending on who you are and where you sit, you may be in conflict with the person running your organization. And the idea that it takes a great deal of courage to, one, know what you're doing and make sure you are making the technically right decision, morally right decision, and then be willing to bear the consequences. So as leaders, hopefully most of us aren't attending to life and death questions, but we are attending to having, again, the mindset and the finesse to know when to stay the course, when to say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am to a boss so that we get to stay employed on things that aren't that crucial, and then to stay the course on things that are absolutely crucial. And I think this kind of mindset can be very nuanced, and having external perspectives is really helpful, because I may think something's absolutely critical and somebody sitting right next to me may say, lighten up, that one not worth jeopardizing your professional career over, but this other one absolutely is. And we live in our own heads and have our own stories. So the balance between having my own inner compass and also people I trust is an interesting one here. Does anyone else have a comment on unwavering commitment to right action?
This is Kate. I'll weigh in. I think that there's also the sense of knowing which battles to pick. And this is really what you were talking about, Maureen, knowing when it's an issue to be unstoppable and unflappable, like your slide says, but knowing when you've got the social capital to do it too. So there might be a battle that is worth fighting. If you don't have the social capital and there isn't any, if there isn't going to be an outcome that's going to make a difference to whatever the issue is, sometimes I have found that the decision might mean, well, maybe it's not time to fight that battle. Maybe it will be time in a little bit. But I think understanding which battles to pick, but understanding your social capital in the situation are probably two factors that I personally use toward this leadership factor.
Thank you, Kate. And as you say that, I'm thinking of a client I met with yesterday, and on the social capital topic, she needed to ask for help. As soon as she got help, then she could merge her social capital with someone else and address it, but she couldn't do it solo. So again, it is as much finesse as knowing the right path. Okay,
That can depend on your organization as well, in terms of in your role. I've been in finance, and a CFO and a controller, among other things. And sometimes, especially when you're new in that role, you have to take a chance and just make sure that it doesn't go off the rails in the wrong way.
Mhm.
That we are following the rules, you're doing things that aren't going to get you in trouble. And sometimes you have no social capital, you're new.
Mhm.
But what that does for you is, or can do for you, is build your integrity. And that's when you start to build social capital around actually that commitment to doing the right thing. And I know Warner's been through that too in cybersecurity. Sometimes there are things that you really shouldn't do, and you have to take a stand, and you may not have the social capital, but if you don't, and you're not true to yourself, that can be more damaging long term, in my opinion.
No, it's interesting you say that. I wasn't going to volunteer it, but an initiative I'm working on right now is in its final stages, and had some difficult conversations earlier. And I've spent a good portion of the day weighing not only what is the right thing, but what can be done, be it social capital, how much time, how many people, because we're talking a very short time window. And it's something I'm still working through, but the primary thing is grounded very much in what is the right thing, because we make commitments to people. And partly why it's not a popular topic right now is because I'm holding people accountable to the commitments we made. And that's often not a popular position to be in.
So Warner, as you say that, it ties very closely also to this professional humility, getting it right, doing the right thing ahead of being perceived as right. And sometimes that means we have to say, what we thought and what we're going to do now. We've learned more, and we're going to take a different course. And that is, again, where I look at Dr. Fauci, and the science evolved. And for many of us, we're watching the work products evolve, watching the situation evolve, changes in the ecosystem as we're watching some of the, oh God, brain fart. The things like the pipeline where we're hijacked, and what happens this week may be different than what happened last week. So do you want to share any more, Warner, about your situation and the humility and the courage to say what we were doing we may need to refine?
Yeah, well, it's literally something that's been transpiring today. So it's still very much a work in progress, but I think that it was a situation where I found myself grounding and taking the time to digest it and think through it, as opposed to reacting in the moment, and figuring out the best way to meet our obligations and be responsible to our commitments. And I'm not quite there yet. There's some people I need to talk to and some details I need to revisit, but I think those situations are common, and the context may be different, but the concepts are universal.
Maureen,
yeah.
I think to Kate's point earlier, how you present that is important. And I think always coming from a positive point of view as opposed to a negative point of view. And then to Warner's point, he said, having options, always a good answer, right? Not just no, we can't do it, but here's what we can do, right? I think those are both good approaches, or good things to be thinking about when you're in those.
Thank you. And Warner, I advanced the slide while you were talking because, again, your thoughts went exactly with this slide, which is highly authentic and reflective. that you're taking time to reflect on it, and that each of us as leaders, we're in, again, complex situations that may not have not only an easy answer, but that right isn't clear, is emerging with each step we take, and other options become available. So taking the time to reflect and being authentic about where we are and what we know and what constraints we're facing, so that we are genuinely co-creating as we're addressing issues, rather than I, as the leader, am doing it. And often I'm co-creating with a larger set of constituents. And I'm going to go through the last couple quickly, just so we can move into conversation. The next is able to inspire followership. And as we think about what's inspirational and who has in your careers inspired you, when we ask in groups, we hear things like competence, certainly, trustworthiness, able to resolve conflict, someone who sets a vision. And Mike, this plays to what you and Kate said, that's positive and inspirational, where we are solving big problems rather than, or small problems, but they're meaningful. We're doing meaningful work, and people have the opportunity to contribute their life's energy to something that matters, not just making money or doing things that seem less relevant. So I care about my people. I care about their growth and their success and their sense of purpose. I want to make sure that what we're doing is aligned around something that matters to them and to the world, and create an environment where they're able to thrive. So that's inspiring followership. And then the last one is innately collaborative. And again, in times of complexity, we can often not solve, we're not able to look to best practices. We're not able to look to others because we are co-creating. And that means that the most robust or anti-fragile or resilient solutions come from integrating multiple and different and often conflicting points of view. So we need to have the ability to put people together in a room who see the world differently. And sometimes they're not harmonious. It means pulling, almost pulling strings from different tapestries and weaving them together. So I have to be able, as the leader, either to do or find someone who can facilitate this ability to integrate differing perspectives into a solution where people can then, and Kate, this plays to the change management piece, where people can get behind this solution that isn't their solution, where we're pulling points of view from someone I may not like, or from those people, rather than from my people, and creating a robust solution that we're at least willing to try, rather than rejecting for all the reasons humans reject. And so that is the 7 mindsets. Let's open this to, I'm going to turn off, let me see what the, if when you do the assessment, if you do it, you're going to have a score, a gap, and a target. And then I would suggest just picking what is a priority for you. I'm going to now stop the share and ask that we have a conversation. How does this, oh, thank you, Erin, for your message. I'm glad you joined. So let's just have an open conversation. How does this resonate, and what's either what questions do you have or what's interesting to you?
I like the discussion we had, in that if you think of the evolution of our program, and from peer to manager, community leadership, and now executive leadership, and no matter where someone might be in their career, be it you're building a career as an individual contributor, or transitioning into leadership, or have established experience as a leader, you'll notice that our topics and our discussion today was a lot more abstract and reflective, and it would be easy to maybe misinterpret that or think that it didn't address the topic directly, but what it really did was the evolution of the dialogue today is exactly that. The mindset and the thought processes and how to engage on an executive leadership level. So thank you for that, Maureen.
Thank you, Warner. I appreciate the opportunity just to engage in conversation. And if people disagree, push back, because I learn as much from disagreement as I do from agreement. And we learn as much.
I think the thing that struck me while you were talking today is how much no one of those things is anywhere near good enough, obviously at any given time, but especially right now with everything that's been going on, like just running towards the finish line with your own idea rather than taking the time to be humble and listen to others and get involved and learn more about the things that are newer to you, because definitely something about the last year was new news to any human being, I think. But you know, there's sort of some of the traits that maybe got early on in your career are exactly why you chose to go on a leadership path in the first place. And some of those instincts are actually what need to take a back seat in order to deal with how complicated the last year has been, right? So I've actually spent most of the year trying to stay away from new leadership and trying to do more just running with other people's ideas, running actually being a doer rather than a leader. And I think that's a little bit the different take on what you were talking about in terms of continually growing or learning. But I've found that to be really, it's been an amazing year actually for me.
Well, and Rachel, to that point, leadership isn't just a formal role. But again, as we talk about mindsets, people lead in all kinds of different ways. And if I think of people in my life that I've admired, they all haven't been in formal roles, but they're people, back to that inspiring followership, that have made a difference in my life because of what they did and who they were in the process.
One thing I'll say quickly as we're winding down, because we do intend to formally end on time. As part of the TechLife Live session, we like to share a poll during every program. So we'll be sending a poll out briefly here. And as we fill that out, feel free to continue the discussion as well. Well, I think that's probably a good transition too. I'd like to formally close the program since we have 2 minutes left. And like I said before, I'll be spending a little more time after the program if anyone would like to continue the discussion. I'd like to recognize Maureen again. She's an author, a speaker, a radio host, and she's recently published a new book as well. How can folks plug into some of the things you're working on, Maureen, be it your new book or anything else?
Thank you, Warner. So I would say, one, our blog, we try to put content out every week. Connect with me on LinkedIn. And we have a LinkedIn newsletter, Innovating Leadership. And in that, we post both the blog, weekly blog, and the podcasts. And we've had great speakers. The one actually this week is talking about going from manager to leader. And last week was digital body language. So Kate, I'll point that to you. And the idea that how we show up digitally, that to do this well, the working remotely and working hybridly, there are tools emerging. And Erica Dewan talked a little bit about what that looks like and what we need to attend to so that we can be successful. So for anyone on the call or anyone who listens later to the recording, I would love to connect with anyone in our community. And we make these resources available at no cost. I don't try to track you down. My commitment in the world is to elevate the quality of leadership, and that means for everyone, not just people who pay me.
Thank you, Maureen. If you'd like, feel free to drop some of those links in the chat here. Maureen's radio program has recently been syndicated by NPR as well. So very, very accomplished guests, very high quality program. I'd recommend it highly. And I'd like to thank Maddie and Kyle for being with us throughout the entire TechLife Live leadership, career, and community program. They're the reason why we didn't have a single Zoom bomb and why these programs were always executed so well. So big thanks to Kyle and Maddie.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for being here. And well, shoot, this is our last scheduled session. So it's been a pleasure. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Warner, for organizing this. All 3 sessions have been exceptional.
Oh, that's generous of you, and thanks so much, Maureen. I'm glad you were influential in the program as well, being the effective keynote of the program. I appreciate the perspective you shared throughout.
Thank you. And to people who participated, Mike and Kate, and I'll say Andy, even though you're not still here, and Rachel, thank you for speaking and being engaged.
Would you mind stopping the recording, Maddie or Kyle?